Well, it is the end of the LCS season. Championships are upon us. This video should be coming out right around that time, and we're filming it, recording it just a couple days beforehand. But I'm joined right now by Chris Greeley, who's the head of North American Esports at Riot Games, to talk about everything that's happened this past year and everything that will happen in the future. It's going to be very comprehensive. Of course, this coverage brought to you by Alienware. So first off, Greeley, thanks for doing this, Commissioner Greeley. How have things been for you this year? Because obviously, I think a lot of us expected things to be going back to normal, and yet you just had to a short time ago cancel finals in Newark and move them to LA. Pivot is, I think, the word you guys are using.
Yes, well, because we didn't cancel the event, right? We just moved.
Yes, yes,
So
pivot. It's much more positive. Yes.
Yeah, it really is. It's been a hard year. I think that we came into the year, around spring split, kind of expecting what we had. Like everyone knew, what our limitations were going to be around COVID. We were already in remote production. We didn't. I heard Sven's press conference after midseason showdown where he's like, "Hey, why'd they make us play outside?" But at the time, right, and through all of our planning, that was our option, right? It was either have them play remote and lift another trophy into their ceiling, or find an outside venue. And we looked at a bunch of different places. We had looked at the Santa Monica Pier. We had looked at the top of the Standard Hotel in LA, and ultimately the Greek Theater, set up like a theater. It was just a much better setup for us. So obviously we didn't get everything perfect. Playing outside is difficult, but we thought it gave us the best chance to kind of keep everybody safe and still have a show, right? That wasn't the LCS arena just wasn't an option at the time. Coming into summer, though, we had much different expectations. We knew we were going to get talent back in the building. As we got close to June, we realized that we could get pro teams back in the building. And with the vaccine rollout, we had talked to our partners over at the Prudential Center and thought, with the vaccine rollout, we're going to get a show. We're going to have a full live show. It was a really difficult decision to pivot the show from Newark, New Jersey, my home state, back to the arena in California. It was certainly not what the teams wanted, and certainly not what the pro players wanted. Everyone wanted a live audience. Everyone wanted the show. They wanted the confetti in front of 6, 7, 8,000 fans. But ultimately, everyone understood why we had to make the decision. And we made it a couple of weeks ago. When you look at the numbers now, right, they've only gotten worse, which was the expectation. Certainly, I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to cancel the show and then have the numbers spike back down and have everyone be okay. That's obviously not what we got. But so there's been a lot of challenges. But we're really happy about the way Summer Split went in particular. I think we had 4 new shows that were released, 4 new content pieces, which all went, I think, really well. Replay Files was awesome. We had Next Level and Lane by Lane and Masterminds, 4 shows that I think everyone who watched them, all of the reception I've seen has been incredibly positive. I think the broadcast, having our talent back in studio, is just a huge upgrade. Just the energy you get off the casters being in the same space has been huge. And I think this is one of the most competitive splits we've had in a long time. I know you think so too, because I do follow you on Twitter. We hit a point a couple of weeks ago where, we had the top 5, 6 teams, and it's like, hey, we feel pretty good about any of these teams representing us at Worlds, and kind of what that means for us. So, all in all, a good split in a really tough environment.
Yeah. No, I mean, to your point, it has been incredibly competitive, and I have really enjoyed a lot of the stuff that you guys have brought to the league this year. And so I think that's kind of one of the jumping off points that I'd like to have in this conversation, is just sort of what do you think is working, and where do you think you guys are looking to make changes for next year? Acknowledging, of course, that a lot of the changes are made over the course of the next couple months, but getting just a sense on where cheers and jeers almost, right, on this year. So one of the things I wanted to chat with you about was just the new shows, because I, in particular, felt like these things were incredible and really well made. But one of the things that I think a lot of fans have had a hard time with this year is connecting with a lot of the players. And the new shows themselves, I think, did not always do the best job of like throwing a lot of the players out there, right? Certainly something I think you guys have tried to address with some of these post game interviews on broadcast, but I am wondering where your thoughts are on the shows, because I do think that in some ways they sometimes feel a little disconnected from what the LCS is.
How so?
So, in particular, like specifically around the fact that, for instance, Next Level, which I think is fantastic, doesn't always have a lot of LCS players on it, and so we're kind of in a place right now where last year we saw tremendous turnover to this year in terms of players like filtering out of the LCS, and for me, I think there's been a need for everybody in the space, teams, Riot, myself, media, etc., to really build out a lot of the stories of the players and the personalities of the players. And yet I feel like the majority of the time, the guests that were on these shows were not active LCS players. So I don't know if that's what your thoughts are on those shows and how they've contributed to the LCS, because I agree they are fantastic, and I don't want this to feel like I'm just dogging on the shows, but kind of where your head's at.
Yeah, I think the biggest hindrance we had was just the availability of active players to be on the show, right? We have a shooting schedule, they have a practice schedule and a game schedule, and they get a single off day every week. So finding a way for those to cross over. I know that we had a couple of replay files where there were players that we wanted that would have really rounded out the story that just weren't available. They had other commitments, they couldn't make it. So I think for us, one of the things we've talked about a lot with these shows is how do we better maximize their impact? Does it make sense to run them as the first 30 minutes of a show day? Does it make more sense to release them midweek on a normal cadence? Does it make more sense to release them every 2 weeks so it's easier to like arrange a guest slate and a shooting schedule? So those are a lot of the conversations we'll have in the off season. I think a lot of the content for us was really proof of concept. When I heard the content team talk to me about masterminds, I don't think I got it. I understood that they were going to do some theory crafting and do some weird stuff, but when I saw the pilot in the first episode and the way Kobe really kind of drew out some great dialogue with some of the players who were up on stage, like the presence of the pros just like really made the whole concept for me. I thought Kobe did a great job sort of carrying in places where he had to as well. So when you look at those shows, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to potentially use them in different ways, kind of hit some different points with them, and spend a lot more time, as you noted, like finding ways to get active pro players on, especially folks that we're actively trying to build up. Like we spent a lot of time the spring the like season kickoff video, which you were in, highlighted Spica and Tactical and FBI, and we don't know that we did the best job of telling their story arc through the whole season, which is a shame because they're fantastic players and like are the future of the LCS, and we have a lot of work to do there, and these kind of content pieces I think are a great vehicle for that.
Yeah, I mean that's I appreciate you pointing that out, because that has been something where like it's been awesome to see the LCS return to the studio even without the audience, which I wish was there. But I do feel like over the course of the year there's just like some missed opportunities. Like I thought a lot about the Sven interview that took place after Sunday, where he had talked so much about how tough it had been for him to be on TSM and be like, oh, they always go to Worlds, and now suddenly they're not going with me. Then Cloud9, oh, suddenly it's not going. And him talking about where the stakes were for him. And for me, I looked at that as a missed opportunity for all of us, like Riot, myself, and the teams, that realizing like, wait, these are stakes that should have been on the table set weeks before. And so that's one of the things that I think I am most excited for next year is a world where like those shows can like pick up that banner a little bit more, depending on it, how you guys continue them. Are you looking at? I totally agree that like time is such a challenge with the players, because I compete for it as well. Are you guys looking at any ways to make sure and ensure that you can have more time with these guys and more availability, so that you can sort of help tell some of these stories a little bit more out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really comes down to two things. One is being able, like, if the shows aren't on as often, if the filming cadence is a little slower, sometimes easier to book folks in advance when you give them a week's notice. I think the other piece is just our competitive calendar. There is, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about format. It's funny because now the first conversation about format is we've changed formats so often in the last like 2 or 3 years that
Yes.
like do we just even if we think there are problems with the format, do we just hold it so that we're not creating this like constant whiplash? But I think there's a lot of really interesting conversations going on right now internally at Riot, and kind of as we started to reach out to the teams and to the Players Association about what next season could look like. I know that I'm pretty firmly committed to making sure we have a lock-in tournament again. I think most of the folks on the Riot side are. I certainly haven't heard any dissension from the teams or the PA about that. But I think there's going to be some topics of discussion around do we keep the triple round robin in summer? What do summer playoffs look like? I think we're all pretty happy with the way MSS has played out. So there'll be a lot of tinkering, but again, like we really do want to find a point where we can, when we hit this offseason conversation of format, there aren't the changes are very minor, and if you're not someone who's watching really closely, you may not even notice them, right? Like the first seed gets to choose or doesn't get to choose, right? Those things that like no one really notices until the end. And I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but like definitely recognize all the feedback that's like, hey guys, why don't you just stop changing stuff? Because it's hard to follow for sure.
Yeah. I mean, to that end, how committed are you guys, and how much of a success do you think the like 15 games a week is? Because I know a lot of fans who have really appreciated that. They're like, I love on Fridays I can like get off work or out of school or whatever and watch all these games. But I have it. I think the viewership trends, which I'd love to talk to you about as well, they mirror a little bit of some of the drop off that I remember from best of threes. And so I don't know if you guys feel like the 15 games a week schedule has been good. I've also heard some players gripe about it a little bit. They gripe about everything, but this is one of those things.
Well, it's, I think one of the gripes that we've heard that's really resonant is that it makes the games it makes us feel more like baseball than football, right? The games don't feel impactful. And we heard, in the middle of the summer split, there was I don't know, TSM Cloud9 game or a Cloud9 TL game, right? One of those like kind of marquee top of the standings matchups. Where people are like, well, I mean, what's the big deal? They play like 5 or 6 times before, like not even counting playoffs. Like why tune in? And that's certainly not a feel. Like we want those games to feel special. We want every game to feel special. But if you're you're a Golden Guardians fan, like you want that Golden Guardians 100 Thieves matchup to like, feel impactful for you as you watch like some of your old roster play. And I'm not sure we're getting that right now. So we want to look at that. On the flip side, one of the things we heard from teams last year is we want more competitive games. We want more games on stage. Part of it was just, more competitive games is good practice for players. The other part of it was, if you want us to try new things, you want us to move talent around, you want us to give guys a shot, the games have to be slightly less impactful, right?
Yeah.
If I'm only getting, my 18 games in a split, there's a world where if I lose 1 or 2 of those because I want to try out a new player, a rookie, someone up from academy, like the stakes are too high. So we wanted to mix in a little bit of that too. I thought carrying over the record from spring made spring feel a little more impactful too. But, as you said before, there's a lot of conversations that are happen kind of between now and when we start making announcements about next season. And we haven't started to dig in too deeply with teams, and we haven't started to dig in too deeply with the Players Association. We're literally just starting kind of the early feedback tour. So I don't want to get too far out over my skis on like what's working and what's not, but we certainly have seen the feedback from pros. We've seen the feedback from fans. We have a lot of feedback ourselves. So this is my favorite part of the year. I think the meeting where we get kind of all the operational folks from the teams in a room to start talking about format is my favorite meeting of the year. So a lot of good stuff to look forward to.
Gotcha. Okay, so it sounds like you would say carrying over the spring record is one of the things that you felt was pretty good about this year. Because
I
I'm
enjoyed
mixed
it.
on it. So I'm
Yeah,
kind of curious what your psych is.
no, I get that, and I see both sides there. Like it does in some respects, right? It slightly overvalues spring, even though there were more games in summer split, right? That was our whole thing at the end of the day. You can carry over the record because you're playing you know 45, you're playing your 18 games in spring, and then you're playing your 27 games in summer. That favors recency. If you don't have a good spring split and you make corrections, you have a great summer split, you can still move up in the rankings. You still wind up in the top bracket, right? Like there is still hope for you, and vice versa, right? The same way that we've seen championship points kind of carry from spring and help teams make it to worlds who have a weaker summer, right? We thought this was kind of a better way to kind of assess overall strength, and give us the best chance to send our three strongest teams to worlds. But we're looking at all sorts of options kind of around that, even around playoff formats for summer. Do we stick with 8 teams? Do we go to 6 teams? Do we, we've joked about kind of running the gauntlet in parallel, so it's like a losers bracket where
Yeah.
you, after you drop out of the losers bracket, you're now in contention for the third world spot.
There was a Hotline League take this week that actually suggested just that. So, shout out to our Hotline League caller for that. Yeah.
Yeah, look at that. I like that.
Yes.
Yeah, so we've like we spent and this is always my frustration when you wind up kind of tweeting stuff out that's like, hey, here's the latest leak I got from teams, is that it's always with like 1/4 of the context, which is like not your fault, right? You, like, someone tells you something and you're like, oh, this is the stuff everyone's talking about behind the scenes. But we throw a lot of stuff at the wall and have a lot of conversations just trying to eliminate all the bad ideas and figure out what ultimately lands. So we're doing the same thing with format as well.
Okay, well, I was going to save this more towards the end, but since we're on the topic of my tweets, okay,
now that I baited you,
the latest thing. Well, I mean, it makes sense to bring it up and just sort of have the open conversation about it. So on the Academy side, obviously, at the beginning of last month, you and I had a Twitter spar, a very soft Twitter spar compared to so many people's, about where Academy was at. I had heard that a lot of teams had pushed to have Academy requirements lifted, and that the majority of the teams had actually all the teams had agreed to like make this a request of yours. Clearly, it sounds like things changed. The scuttlebutt is that it's because the Players Association came in and leaned heavily on that. On the other hand, though, one of the things that I'd heard was that teams wanted to remove the in LA element of Academy, and that as it stands right now, it is anticipated that there will not be requirement to field your teams in LA, that teams can be sort of dispersed. Presumably the Players Association less happy with that. So I guess my question is, knowing that things are constantly evolving, what can you talk about on the Academy side? Because it from what I understand, the folks that are involved in the development side, the player development side, are really concerned about a world where teams for an Academy are now remote and are not in LA. There's a lot of concerns about how that impacts practice and development.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with the acknowledgement. There are a lot of things still in flux. We had a conversation on a couple of ideas last week with owners where the ones we thought they'd hate, they're like, oh, that's actually pretty good. And the ones we thought they'd love, they're like, this is terrible. So we're still working through a lot of those pieces. We're still having active conversations with the Players Association. When I say we have talked about literally everything for Academy, so we have talked about making Academy optional. We have talked about removing Academy altogether and folding it in with the amateur scene and using proving grounds. We have talked about an MLS style situation where teams don't run Academy teams anymore. The Riot runs a developmental league with 40 players, and the teams all kind of work together to coach and can kind of pull anyone out of that system. We've talked about putting all the active and interested Academy teams on a plane and flying them to Europe or Korea and having them make a bunch of content and play. Like, we have talked about literally everything. We don't have an answer yet, so I can't tell you kind of like where we're going to wind up. It is possible that that teams will have the option to make players remote next year. Still not decided. It is probably unlikely that Academy will be optional. I think it's funny. When we had the conversation with teams and said, all right, if we make Academy optional, will you still have a team? Just about everyone was like, yeah, of course we'll have a team. So it was like this really ridiculous conversation of like, well, if we go through making it optional, right, and like worry all the fans, and then everyone's going to field a team anyway. Like, why? What's the purpose here? Teams are genuinely committed, for the most part, to wanting to develop talent, to like both because it's good for the region, but also because like if you think about talent acquisition, getting a player in at an amateur or an academy level, and like think about Danny, right?
Yeah.
If EG can hold on to Danny, right? Like what a windfall for them, right? They scouted well, they developed well, they bring up a guy who's like, everyone is just like rallied around so quickly because of like not only his great play, but then he has this like highlight reel Tristana play. Right, like such an advantage if you have that muscle in your organization to be able to spot and develop talent. At the same time, I think we've had this like I don't know, really like all over the place view on Academy since we started it in 2018. So it was a full-blown league, right, where we were really worried about viewership. Not worried, but like we were trying to optimize for viewership. We had points where we were running it kind of around LCS to try to get more people watching, not because like I needed the concurrent viewers to be high, but when we looked at like the goal of Academy really should be for our fans to look at Academy players as the future of the LCS. To do that, you have to tell stories about them, and you have to get people to like actually give a shit and watch them play. So we're like, all right, well, if we can't get anyone to watch Academy when we put it on like a Thursday night by itself, let's put it around the LCS and we'll generate some excitement that way. And like that didn't necessarily work. So then we're like, all right, well, we need to like very clearly redefine the amateur and academy pyramid. So we created proving grounds. Like I actually think this year in the developmental cycle was like pretty successful.
It was hugely successful. Yeah. That's why it's crazy to me whenever I hear rumors of things that are like sound like they're pulling away from it.
Yeah, and we don't like development still a big deal for us, still a big deal for teams. But like I think the overall point, I'm like slowly meandering my way to. Yeah. Teams are spending $500,000 each on their academy program every year, and there's no like other than talent development, like there's no real return from it. Like I think they look to us and they're like, hey, what the hell are you guys doing with academy, right? Is it a thing people should watch or is it not, right? Or are you focused on development, or are you focused on storytelling, or are you focused on viewership or revenue or something else? And like I don't think we've had a great answer for them. We've been a little schizophrenic with it. Matt Nasha came in, joined our team. He was at CLG for a long time. He's done a really good job of taking a system. Riot Ice Chest, Derek Dennis moved off to Valorant. Like not to go like too deep into the inside baseball, sure. But he did a really great job of like taking Challenger, building it into Academy, and then building that proving grounds system. And he handed it to Matt, who's like really focused on next year, like kind of helping Academy scale. So what we're focused on for next year, what we've been talking to teams about is like, what makes Academy special? How do we make it feel special to teams? To fans? How do we do a better job of telling stories around players that our fans want to consume? Like, does it matter if a normal fan, like just your general, I watch 1 or 2 LCS games a week kind of fan. Does it matter if they tune into Academy, or is it more impactful for us if we can get them to consume the best highlights, or like focus on the best mid laner from that week, or the best player from that week, or the best support plays, right? Is there a way to better provide them with a story that can like kind of draw them into care, right? It's like if you see you see a great mid laner play and you look and you're like, oh, this is someone worth following. Like, does it better incentivize you? We're spending a lot of time on that line of thinking, right? Not how do we move away from development? I'm sorry, you keep trying to say something and I won't stop talking.
No, it's fine. I'll break in. So in the past, when I thought about Academy, my concern has always been when you're, metric for success is anything other than like development,
Yep.
I worry that like one, you're not optimizing, like you naturally are less likely to optimize for development because you're like, okay, well now we need to get people to be fans of these players, and two, you're like, if you want, let's say next year you guys have that as your philosophy, and then people don't care about that stuff as much. I worry about how that impacts the development program, right? Because then people say, well, look, you said that the whole point of it is to make people care, and like we're not there. I mean, and to be frank, Chris, like I'm a little worried because it feels like right now we have this huge influx of new players into the LCS, and I don't think there's a lot of people who care as much as they should about some of these players. Like their stories are not even being told. So I will say, like I'm a little worried when I hear, well, hey, Academy is going to be about making people care about these players, because I'm like, fuck, I want them to care about the LCS players first. Like, let's get more Jizuke fans out there before we worry about the next generation in some sense.
Yeah, no, super fair point. I think development is still like our key metric. It was our metric this year. It's like we don't talk about the viewership on Academy. We really talk about what the progression looks like and how we're kind of moving players up. The fight I have, not the fight, the
challenge,
passionate argument I have all the time with our head of publishing for the LCS is where we should be putting our resources, right? When I talk to him and say like, hey, we should be talking about doing more social content around our Academy players, his response is the same as yours, which is we need to really focus on star building in the LCS and making sure that with Double Lift and Bjergsen and Sneaky, all kind of still in the ecosystem but not playing every week, that fans are still tuning in to watch Tactical and FBI and Spica.
Sounds like a very smart person. Yes.
Yeah, well, there you go. But I don't know that the two are mutually exclusive. I still think we're turning sort of our Death Star towards the LCS to make sure we have the resources there. But there's a lot of really capable third-party content creators that we can look to around the Academy stuff. The issue really is like comes down to saturation. You're only going to watch so many highlights, only going to watch so many games, so many clips. Finding that balance, I think, is important. If this is the route we wind up going with Academy, and like I keep saying, there's a ton of stuff in flux. If at the end of next year, like we still can't sell those stories, right? No one is interested in them. Maybe we pivot our kind of marketing and publishing plans again. But the core of Academy still remains talent development, right? That is still like it's not a media machine for us. It is meant to bring players up.
So two final questions on the Academy stuff, and then I know we definitely have to move on. But if the core of it is development, why? It's tough for me to understand, so maybe you can explain why it is that there would ever be discussion about like moving the players remote and not having all these teams be in LA, because it's hard to imagine too many coaches or people who are developing these players that would say like, oh yeah, that's equally as beneficial or whatever. It's also challenging for me because I know that some of the answer is probably like money, because obviously team owners have to run not profitable businesses, but aspirationally profitable businesses. And it's just like you look at some of the money that they're spending on some of these players who aren't even bringing them to Worlds, and it's like, well, fuck, can't you just throw a little bit more money in for some apartments in LA? I guess that's the challenge, and so I'm wondering how you manage that, because I know on one hand you probably have the Players Association and the players and everybody who cares about development that's like, look, we need this. This is, if you take this away from us, it's not great. Then you also have team owners on the other side, some of whom were quite passionate about lifting an import rule not too many months ago, who seem to feel like the resources are better spent on veterans from other regions. So I guess the question is, how do you philosophically approach that?
Yeah, I think I think it kind of falls into three buckets, right? You're still going to have some teams that have their academy squad. If this is the way it goes, right? So we're not locked on that. We're all still having conversations. I don't want to get a call from the Players Association 10 minutes after this airs. That's like, hey man, what are you doing? You just went out and announced to the world, and we're still in conversations. Sure. None of this is locked, but when you kind of think about the arguments, we have some teams that are going to continue to run their academy team in LA. They already have the infrastructure. They want to use their academy team as a practice squad for their LCS team. They want to be able to like very freely kind of move players up and down. You have some teams that have talked about keeping their team together and just not in LA. We've heard we've heard arguments of like, hey, why wouldn't I keep my team in Chicago? Right, where they're playing basically on top of the server and like they get much better solo queue practice than they would get. And then you've got a third bucket, and it's cheaper, depending on where. Maybe put them in Indiana. And then your third bucket of teams are planning to run, may plan to run fully remote if given the option. And that provides some, like, there are definitely downsides to that, right? Not having everyone in the same place where you can finish a scrim, turn around, have something projected up on a screen, kind of talk through, your level one or mistakes that were made, right? But it provides other resource benefits as well. Like there are teams that I think will be able to more effectively manage their academy team if it is remote, just based on resources, right? Doesn't mean those resources are, your words were like going to an import player. There is a very real world where those resources go to coaches or analysts. There is a world where it allows them a little more freedom to kind of like try more players, right? It's expensive right now to onboard an academy player, move them to LA, put them up in a house, and then you get a couple weeks in and you think, well, this might not be the right fit for our organization. Like you've made a pretty big investment at that point. If you have a player who's logging on from their house in Dallas and they play a bunch of games and like hopefully they're a fit, but if they're not, there's kind of less of an investment made on both the player side, right? They're still at home. Like if they don't get picked up by another team, they're not stranded in LA without a place to live. And it gives the team more freedom. I think you're going to see a lot of different models that evolve if this is the way we ultimately go. And I think as teams go to fight for that academy talent, right? When you talk about the cost of player acquisition and trying to get guys in early that you can bring up through the system and not have to pay huge buyout fees somewhere or like huge salary increases somewhere down the line. I think there are going to be some orgs who call up and say, hey, we're going to fly you to LA. We're going to put you up in a house. You're going to scrim with the LCS squad. And you have other folks who are going to say, no, you stay put. Maybe we'll pay you more money. Maybe we won't. Like, here are the resources you'll have access to. Maybe it's a promise to get to LCS faster. Maybe it just is what it is. And players are going to be able to make some choices there. So I think that, like I said, there's a long road between now and when everything gets locked in. But I think there's a lot of good conversations going on. I think the Players Association, since Phil has taken over as the executive director, have been really active participants in our conversations. I know Darshan has been in a lot of those conversations as well as the kind of player president of the PA. They certainly have a lot of opinions on the way academy and amateur is running and should run in the future. And we're having a lot of those conversations in parallel with talking to owners and ultimately like just trying to build the best system we can.
Could keep talking about Academy forever, but I know we're running low on time. So I do want to talk about something which might not be the most fun thing to talk about, but is probably important, which is viewership. So I know last year viewership actually was up, I think in part because of the pandemic. You saw it in a lot of different areas. And while viewership has gone down, I think, across the board on Twitch and on a lot of places, it does feel like this summer the LCS has been hit pretty hard. I mean, I'm even seeing it on my side, right? So I guess, how concerned are you about the viewership? Do you think it is concerning when we see really big slips like it seemed like we saw towards the end of summer? And two, do you have any ideas on what it is that's causing that?
Yeah, I mean, look, you never want to see your key performance metrics go down, right? There's no world in which I even see, I see like a little red arrow, whether that number is like 1% or 10%. There's no world where I'm like, who cares? At the same time, I'm not losing sleep over it. Viewership's obviously important, but we still have a really strong viewership on our VODs, right? We're seeing a lot of time delayed viewership. And when we look at the why, as you said, there's a lot of kind of macro viewership declines across platforms. We've seen it across other esports, right? We're kind of looking at the whole table. In the U.S., we've certainly seen the like quote unquote summer of freedom. Obviously, that is winding down quickly as COVID numbers increase. But towards the beginning of the summer, especially around July 4th, there were a lot of opportunities for people to like just get the hell out of the house. You've been stuck behind a computer monitor for 15 or 16 months. Like people just wanted to go out and disconnect and see a friend and go to a concert and hit the beach. And like I get that, right? We saw that there was like some expectation there. The other is, we increased the number of games in summer by, 50%. So now we had, more days, more games. The like natural inclination for that is your hours are going to go up because you're putting out a lot more hours of content, and your average viewership is going to go down. So it wasn't totally unexpected. The crossover between the two probably makes the effect look a little bit more dramatic than we had hoped for, but we've still seen really strong engagement. The numbers on this past weekend's last playoff match between Cloud9 and TSM were really good, kind of exactly where we would have expected them to be, even without all these factors. So, things are coming back. I've got tons of hopium, pumping through my veins around how we're going to do at Worlds, and I do think that has an impact on the general enthusiasm that people bring back. Coming into the new season. I think the other big piece, and I think I've seen you talk about it a little bit, everything's just been so damn negative for the whole year, right? I think we started in a really dark place back in January with everyone stuck inside and feeling shitty. We had a lot of like not great conversations going on in the community. The import rule one, which I'll take some responsibility for not raising a hand much earlier in the conversation to like help assuage some fears. But I think when you it's just really easy to punch down on the LCS right now and then like feel good about yourself for doing it. I think when streamers do it, I think they get a lot more reaction than when they say really positive things. So, I'm hoping going into next year that we're able to kind of turn that sentiment around a little bit. It's a shitty feeling, man. You're a pro who runs 14-hour days of scrims and solo queue. You play 3 games on stage. You get 1 day off a week. You're a broadcast producer who, is working 60-hour weeks, or a marketing guy who basically doesn't sleep because you're just concerned about kind of getting the LCS out there. It's a shitty thing to sit down for 5 minutes to take a break and open up Reddit or Twitter and just kind of see a bunch of discourse about something you care so much about that I think is in a pretty good state. Just constantly getting shit on for no reason. So there's always improvements to be made. Like we certainly take the feedback we can from all of those comments, but I'm hoping when the world is in a happier place, we can have more rainbows and sunshines around the LCS.
So 100% agree with you on so much of that, right? Like there is obviously viewership that gets split up across more games and all that stuff. I think for me, my concern is always going to be, what if a lot of it isn't that, right? And so that's kind of my question to you is like, how do you manage that? Because if for instance, like I did the survey, take it for what you will, right? But it talks a lot about, the respondents said a lot of the reasons why they're not watching is because they just feel like the storylines aren't there, the narratives aren't there, or they feel like the broadcast isn't bringing it, right? Kind of to bring it back to what we were talking about at the start of the conversation about players being seen on the LCS and all that stuff. So, like to some degree, do you think that there's a world where it makes sense to just be like, all right, let's just pretend that the viewership is because the product is not in the place it should be, because then at least you can start to make those movements and tweaks and like think critically about what you need to do to improve the product or get into a better place, even if it's like a format change, right? Maybe it is like that 15 games a week thing. Because I think that's one thing that people worry about sometimes is like when there's always like a good reason why viewership might be down that you can point to that's extrinsic. I worry that, and myself and others, I think probably worry that, well, what if there are intrinsic issues that we're glossing over because we're focused on the other things?
Yeah, we look at everything. So there's no sort of resting on our laurels and being like, well, it's not our fault, so we don't have to change anything. Like we spend the whole offseason digging through that. I think the storyline point is a good one. And I hear it from teams sometimes, and like was kind of hard for me to understand in the beginning, and I reflected a little bit on Detroit, and it gave me a lot of context. So
2019 summer finals for those that don't
2019 summer
recall.
finals, yeah. Sorry. So
No, you're
there's like a whole world that is just sort of invisible sometimes to us at Riot on the broadcast side and the storytelling side, that is completely visible to teams. So if you talk to, I don't know, you talk to Parth from TSM, he has a much different view on the stories that are emerging around TSM than we do. And he's been really vocal about that, especially over the last couple of months as we've talked in terms of like, hey, how do I get those stories in front of broadcast? How do I better kind of acquaint the casters, so when they're like digging deep in the middle of a game, especially a slow game, like they have some different talking points. I know our casters went out to the CLG house a couple of years ago, 2018, 2019, and spent some time with those guys just trying to get an understanding. But, you know, we've talked a lot on our side about how do we create those pathways to get that information, right? We don't know what's going on in scrims. We don't know what's going on kind of behind the scenes. Like our casters obviously are pretty well ingrained in the scene, and they have folks they can call and talk to. But when you're getting, you know, information from the same folks all the time, you're definitely not getting a full and complete view. So I mentioned Detroit. So we're there. We had an owners meeting. We're there after the owners meeting, and Steve and Andy, so Steve, you know, owner of Team Liquid, Andy, owner of TSM, just kind of sitting around. Their teams are getting ready to play in the finals. They're just kind of messing around with each other, like know each other really well. 4 fans come into the sports bar where we're all sitting. 2 of them are wearing TSM stuff. 2 of them are wearing Team Liquid stuff. Steve and Andy go over. They chit chat with them. One of the guys shows Andy a TSM tattoo. Andy's wearing a TSM sweatshirt. He takes it off. He hands it to the guy. They take a bunch of pictures. It's like this incredibly heartwarming interaction, right? And it's like this story that you never hear about Steve and you never hear about Andy, and like just the way that owners, and I've seen pro players interact with fans, that like provides these really meaningful experiences. And it was the next day, we're back in that same sports bar. We were kind of having an after event after the finals had ended, and Sven came in. They had just lost finals. He had just gotten caught on Ezreal at the Baron pit. He felt like absolute shit. And, you know, being able to just kind of chat with him for a couple of minutes and seeing all the rioters who went over, who he didn't have a relationship with, they didn't know him, but we spent all of our time watching him play and kind of, you know, offering him words of condolences and, you know, this will all feel better in a couple of days, like that kind of stuff. You know, like really does show that there's like a whole secondary story, right? The fans saw his reaction on stage. They saw, I don't remember if there was a losers press conference at that point, but may have seen him there. But like everything else becomes invisible, and it's just this memory you remember, right? Like Jensen failing to pop his Zonias. Like you'll kind of always remember like Sven not having QSS up when Skarner came around. And it's those kind of stories, right? Those kind of interactions that are happening behind the scenes at the teams, between players, between staff, around game plans, that we want to be able to start ingesting and telling better stories around.
I mean, it's a great point. I'll give you a second if you need to. I know we've been talking.
No, all good.
It's a great point, and I like, for me, that is, speaking candidly, part of the reason why I have been so disappointed this year, because I don't understand how things slipped so far, where everyone, I think, knew Bjergsen and Doublelift leaving was going to leave like a giant hole in this, and in part because I don't blame the broadcast or Riot or anybody for not for anticipating. These guys seemed like they were going to keep playing for a while. Suddenly they're gone. It's like, that sucks. Yeah. But, you know, Riot, I think, especially LCS years ago, was known for just this incredible storytelling. You know, I think about like Drive. I think about even just like goofy videos of like Doublelift teaching Saint Vicious what a doublelift is as a means of explaining what his name comes from. And it feels like it wasn't until summer when I suspect, based off what I've heard, that it was Emily Rand being like, hey, we should get these players on the analyst desk and like talk to them afterwards, that like it even started to feel like we were even seeing just the tiniest shred of that. And like replay files, by the way, obviously great. I don't want to brush over that, but that was off to like the first episode of that was about not the LCS. You know, it was 2 teams players who I loved that we were building their stories and telling where they came from. But it's like, I think that's what has been tough for a lot of people. You know, you talk a lot about like the negativity that you guys see when you go online. I'm sure some of that is from me, but it is like the passion that I feel for the product and wanting like so desperately for people to tell the story of like Jizuke and what's going on with him, even like stupid stuff about, I don't know, him and his search for good pasta in LA. You know, and I think that's where it felt like some of the miss was in 2021. And I don't know. I mean, it sounds like you guys are identifying that too. I'm hopeful that what we see in 2022 is a revitalized LCS around storytelling and player building.
Yeah. It's no knock on my broadcast team or the casters or anyone. Like, I think they do tell great stories. I think we need to go deeper on some of the stories, tell some more varied stories. Like, I think like I said, there's always work to be done. So I don't want any of my broadcast folks who are watching this to think I'm like shitting on the broadcast, because like I do think it's in a pretty good place. I agree that like the storytelling and some of the hero building like definitely can be deeper. I think you know, COVID is always the easy scapegoat, right? It is hard to go out and sit with a player the way we were able to. Like, you talk about Drive, right? Drive was always a piece where we were able to spend a lot of time with a player, usually face to face, in those environments. Maybe we've been a little slow to adapt to kind of our new world order, but it's not a blind spot. Right?
But those Grubhub pieces are incredible, and like that's what's so funny to me is like some of the best storytelling for the players and player building has been those Grubhub pieces, which I've heard your team actually does help create. Yeah. But I'm just like, why is it? I mean, I love Grubhub. They've sponsored me previously, but it's like wild to me that I'm like, wait, our best moments in some places have been these Grubhub pieces. Look, I know we're way over time. I have one last thing I have to ask you about, because people will scream at me on the internet if I don't, which is the FTX stuff. Because when FTX came in, I know, a very big deal for the league, but obviously a lot of questions because it felt like they're, like when they came in and sponsored TSM, there was a bunch of weirdness around that, and like, I don't know. And Andy was on Twitter, CB passive aggressive, and then like ironically, it felt very funny then to suddenly see, and now FTX sponsors the LCS. So I guess this is less of a call out and more of just like, perhaps you can help me and others outside of this world understand how that ended up happening.
Sure. So crypto exchanges generally have long been crypto. The whole industry has for a long time been a prohibited category. We have a couple of them. Like, you don't see Pornhub, you don't see guns, right? There's a list that all the teams have, and it's OnlyFans, right? Yes. Well, they were cool for like a week under our guidelines, but now they're not
going
cool
back.
Again.
Yeah, how unfortunate for them.
Yeah, well. So we spent a lot of time talking to our teams and then to our internal folks, our global team, our legal department, about how we could open up crypto exchanges, because there were a lot of them that were interested in being around the scene. Some of our teams, Evil Geniuses was sponsored by Coinbase. They just couldn't touch the LCS team and kind of be around the LCS. So we worked out a framework. And one of the restrictions on it, as we were kind of working through, and at the same time, TSM was off talking to FTX, was that while we would let them in as sponsors, they couldn't be the title sponsor for a team. So you couldn't be, for example, like TSM is not TSM FTX inside of the LCS universe. And the reason for that is there are all sorts of regulatory regimes all over the world that treat crypto and the advertisement of crypto exchanges differently. We broadcast into some of those areas, and in order to make sure that like we didn't run afoul of local laws and get in a bunch of trouble, we have to be able to strip the crypto references off of our broadcast. So right now we have the ability, when you watch the LCS broadcast, you see the little FTX logo,
Gold Advantage.
FTX Gold Advantage. We have the ability to pull that out of a feed that goes to a place like China, where we don't want to advertise crypto, where it is not permitted under their local regulations, as far as we know. So that limits TSM's ability, for example, to have FTX on their jersey, or Evil Geniuses to have Coinbase on their jersey, or to have it in their name. So when the news broke there was just no differentiation between what TSM was doing as an organization. They signed a great deal, and like I thought their intro video, was super funny.
Well acted.
Well acted, yeah. But there was no differentiation in some of those announcements between kind of what TSM could do in the Riot universe and what they were just doing in their organization generally. And then there were some folks who very specifically in news stories called out that like, hey, that means there'll be TSM FTX in Valorant and in League of Legends. So we put out the clarifying, and then all the other 9 LCS teams who were like, know that can't be the case, all see that. And so they wonder like, well, wait a minute, did the rules change and no one told us, or is TSM breaking the rules? And it turned out that it was neither, right? Andy hadn't sold TSM FTX into the LCS or Valorant. There was this public messaging thing. So we came out and tried to clear the record to make sure that there were no misconceptions. I think it came off as passive aggressive from us. So we got a response on that from Andy. In the background, we're having very cordial conversations about kind of how all this plays together and what the future looks like. So we had opened up crypto exchanges for teams. Like I said, they're out there talking to them. At the same time, so were we. We started our conversation with FTX, kind of very quickly reached a deal and put that deal together in a way that allows us, again, to kind of pull those elements off of broadcast if and when we need to. Same with Bud Light. There are regions in Europe where our broadcasts can't show Bud Light. We have the ability to kind of pull those off as well. And like that's how we put the package together. And then it goes out. And I know a lot of fans look at it and they're like, well, wait a minute, like TSM can't be TSM FTX in the LCS, but you guys can have FTX as a sponsor. Like, how come the rules don't line up? And like to a great extent they do. I have the ability to pull all of our stuff off of broadcast. I can't pull the jersey off, right? And like, I'm sure I could blur the patch and like do something weird, but like honestly, at the end of the day, it's like it's an awfully big lift. And then at the end of it, we wind up just not showing TSM jerseys on broadcast, which is like a loss for everybody. So anyway, that's kind of how we got from here to there.
Just a random quick question on this, but you mentioned having to strip the FTX stuff out for other places. How do you guys manage that from a cast standpoint? Because the casters are obviously referencing the FTX Gold Advantage frequently, so I don't know if that's they're just not able to get a feed of the English cast or whatever.
Correct. Yeah, it's any place we go in English, we have to be good, kind of under their regulations. Otherwise, we tend not to broadcast. I guess if you're in China, you can still get the English broadcast, but not to get like, but it's not directed at China.
Right? Yeah.
Kind of one of those things.
It's not an officially supported feed.
Yeah.
And then the last thing on the FTX thing is, I know after the Neom stuff in LEC, there was a conversation around having Riot having like a deals committee or something that kind of vets these things before they go through. Obviously, crypto is an emerging industry and one that has a lot of conversation around it. So I'm kind of curious, like, does that deals committee work? I forget what it's called. Is it exist now, and did the FTX stuff go through it?
Yep. Yeah. Yes on both.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it certainly was reviewed. Yeah.
All right. Well, I know we've talked about a ton. First off, I thank you for doing this. It was nice that all these questions were spontaneous and not pre-submitted. Is there anything that you want to shout out, Greeley, before we wrap this up? Because I know I'm being childish, but I appreciate the open and long conversation we've been able to have.
Yeah. No. First of all, thanks for having me. I want to shout out two very specific things. So. First, to all the good people of the great state of New Jersey, we will see you in the summer of 2023.
Okay.
Sorry that we lost our LCS championship this year, but we have worked with the fine folks over at the Prudential Center, and they're owned by the same company as Dignitas. They've been really great partners. They worked with us kind of all the way through this year as we kind of, in May and June, we're looking at vaccine numbers and COVID numbers and figuring out like, hey, do we need to cancel now? And, they worked with us kind of all the way up to when we had to cancel. They were very supportive. So we're really happy to go back. I'm happy to bring the LCS back to my home state, get some really good pizza. I'll take you to Benny Tadino's in Hoboken when we all go out in 2023. And then, the worst part about the Prudential announcement was all of our fans in Texas who are like, well, wait a minute, what about us? We lost our event too. We are going to Houston, Texas and the NRG Stadium where the Houston Texans play, COVID permitting, for MSS in spring of next year. So we'll be there next April for what, based on the fact it's in a football stadium, we're still working out the seating arrangement, but has the potential to be the largest esports show in North American history across any esport. Again, COVID notwithstanding, right? We hope everything is better.
And just a quick catch. You said New Jersey, and then you said when we all go out in 2023. Do you mean 2022 for LCS?
Sorry, it is 2020 MSS 2022 in Houston. So our next roadshow.
Yes,
Houston,
yes, okay.
Just a 3.5 mile drive up the road from our friends in Dallas, who right, and then summer of 2023.
Oh, okay, okay.
We'll
so
be
in the next 2 years,
Center.
New Jersey will get the run back. We'll
get the run back.
Okay.
Yeah. So currently unannounced is LCS Championship 2022 and MSS 2023. We are working on those, just not ready to announce them, but wanted to make sure our fans who had bought tickets, had looked for the show, know that we are coming back to see them.
Yeah, I hear Hawaii is a wonderful destination next year if you're looking for ideas. On that note, I know mega overtime. Worlds. Is Worlds happening in North America next year, COVID permitting?
Yes, it will be here across 4 cities in North America, all to be announced later on by our global team.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for the interview. I'm very excited for next year. It's been a tough time, I know, this year, but I do appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I appreciate everybody who sat through what's been a very long interview, but lots to talk about. So thank you again, Commissioner Greeley. And for everyone else, can I call you still Commissioner Greeley? I know you got the promotion, but you're interim commissioner.
Yeah, I guess that is like the joke. We will be hiring someone to take over the LCS from me. So if you're interested out there, fans who are watching, or Travis Gafford, I
would not want your job.
Yeah.
The politics of it, plus you have to deal with people like me. It sounds awful.
Yeah. But we should be in that hiring process in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So hopefully we'll get someone in place by the beginning of the year, and then I have 6-7 months to help them kind of get up on their feet and navigate things like Hotline League and owners meetings before I kind of take off the training wheels and push them out of the nest.
Very good. Well,
weird mixed metaphor, but
I look forward to having a friendly animosity with them as well. Thank you again, Commissioner Greeley, for the interview. For everyone else, you can check out the rest of my coverage of all things LCS right here on my YouTube channel. We are headed into finals, and this is my final outro. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to make a ton more of these, but it is not the final time that I will promote Alienware, our amazing sponsor. Alienware.com/Travis. Check out the link in the description. Just do it, all right? It's a great way to celebrate finals by celebrating my sponsors. That's what I'm doing here. Anyway, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do that. That also helps. And there's some names scrolling across the bottom of the screen that have subscribed recently. You can end up on that list if you do too. So thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll catch you next time.